Good morning, my dear brothers and sisters. The gospel story is quite straightforward. However, a caveat, this is not an endorsement of the ideology of capitalism. Remember, this is a parable. So we do not take this as a literal story about trading and investments. A wealthy man assigns his goods, talents, to each of 3 servants to care for a while he is away. When he returns, he sees that 2 of the 3 servants made good investments. They earned. And so, at this point, it is a happy story because 5 became 10, 2 became 4. Of course, at this point, the master is delighted. So perhaps at this point, the homily would be about making the most of what we have. There are 2 versions of today's gospel. There's a longer one, the one that I've just read, and there is a shorter one. The shorter one stops at this second story. However, not to make judgments on the liturgists, I would say that if we cut the gospel to the second servant and not mention about the third servant, I think we will miss the point of the gospel. Why? Because when the story goes to the third servant, then the story becomes more interesting. Because the poor soul did not invest the money at all. He buried it. This is kind of the twist of the story. He buried it. He was afraid. And so he wanted to keep the money safe. He feared failure, so he played safe. He didn't want to go out of his comfort zone, risking something, risking anything, risking it all. And so he remained where it is comfortable, where it is safe. And so he buried the talent. He buried the money. Many Christians, many Catholics fear failure. I don't know if you have experienced fear of failing, getting bad grades, failures in relationships, failure in business, failure in professional endeavor. Di na lang ko mo take og board exam kay mahadlok ko basin dili ko makapasar sa board exam. Fear of failure. Dili na lang ko mo risk of any friendship because I might just be betrayed. I will no longer commit to a lifelong commitment like priesthood or married life because I might just fail. Fear of is so prevalent that there are many life coaches today who will just focus their careers in advising and coaching people how to move out of their fear zone. In fact, there are many diagrams now, no? Fear zone, comfort zone, fear zone, learning zone, growth zone. And the whole point of life coaches is precisely to move from comfort zone, fear zone, learn something from it, and then grow, and then move on. However, it seems that if you reflect on our gospel today, there seems to be 3 things which lie at the root of our protagonist's fear of failure in our gospel today. Perhaps the first one is what we can call people-pleasing. The servant was kind of worried his master might not be pleased if he will fail investing. And some people, I don't know if you know them, or I don't know if you're one of them, sometimes we fear failure because we're afraid what might people or what will people say. Basig unsa ilay kasulti kung ma-fail ko, basig i-bash ko sa Facebook, basig libakon ko sa among religious group, basig libakon ko sa among parokya. So I will not even try risking anything because I don't want, or I always want to please people. Perhaps the second reason for the failure of our protagonist today is perfectionism. He did not want to lose. I want to be perfect. So if it's less than perfect, I will not risk it. Otherwise, I could not face myself in the mirror that I committed one mistake, that I failed. The tendency for super perfectionist people is that they're overly critical of others, and they're also overly critical of themselves. In my almost 25 years as a priest, I would encounter penitents in the confessional confessing sins which they have confessed 15 years ago. And I would ask them, did the priest give you an absolution? Oh yes, Father, 20 times already. But could not forgive himself or herself. And perhaps the final reason of the fear of failure of our protagonist today is that perhaps he is a tad pessimist. Perhaps he was looking immediately at failure, and he is looking for the possibility that indeed he will fail. Na ay pangana ni Murphy's Law. If you think that things can go wrong, things will really go wrong. Pessimist people are people who look at life like it is already half empty. Pessimist people, they refuse to believe in hope and in the possible positive outcome of anything. And so our fearful servant in our gospel today, he buried the treasure because maybe he was a perfectionist, maybe because he is a pessimist, or maybe because he is a people pleaser. And perhaps this is the challenge of our gospel today, to look at ourselves. What are the fear factors in our lives? Fear, if we don't bring this feeling to God and to God's hope and to God's trust, can be paralyzing, just like how it paralyzed the third servant in our gospel today. It so paralyzed him that he could not even take a calculated risk of putting the money in the bank, so that bahalag na ay 0.001% nga interest. So perhaps the question for all of us today is, or perhaps the question that you are having in your minds today, okay, Father, you've listed possible reasons for fear of failure. What has the Bible said about overcoming fear of failure? How do we overcome fear of failure? I have 3 suggestions You can take them, you can reflect over them, you can chew on them, and you can spit them out on your way out of the church. But I'll take the risk. Perhaps the Bible is telling us that in relation to people pleasing, at the very root of our desire to please people, put our best pictures in Instagram and Facebook, is because we want to be liked. Who doesn't want to be liked? Everybody wants to be liked. But when we please people simply because we want only to be significant in the eyes of others, and for us that is the ultimate value, I think our gospel today, or even the Bible, will remind us that the only person worth pleasing for is God. The most important thing in life is to make sure that our lives are pleasing to God, and pleasing others perhaps is but a consequence because we have lived our lives that is pleasing in the eyes of Jesus. And I think it is a sure bet that when we please God, automatically people who believe in God and people who have the same values with God will be pleased with us. No matter how many likes, no matter how many hearts there will be in our social media posts, perhaps we would say, that's not the most important thing. Yes, it is sometimes important, but I will not lose over 5 likes just because I want to please and be significant in the eyes of others. In relation to perfectionism, I remembered a saying by a great Spanish painter. His name is Salvador Dali. And one of his pupils would not want to take the risk of exhibiting a painting or his paintings because he said they are less than perfect. And so Salvador Dali told his students, do not be afraid of perfection because you will never reach it. So when we're afraid that we're not perfect, don't worry because you will never be perfect. Only the Father in heaven is perfect. And in fact, in Paul's letter to the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 19, St. Paul tells the Corinthians, who were perfectionist Greeks, God's power works best in my weakness. And to the Romans he said, for it is when I am weak that I am strong in the grace of God. I've come across a saying that says, fail responsibly. Many times in life we fail. But the most important thing is we realize that we're not perfect people and we can sin and we can fail anytime. The most important thing is we fail responsibly. We learn something. And finally, pessimism. For pessimism, the second reading today is a very beautiful reading because in our second reading today to Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, he says, my brothers and sisters, we are not in the dark. We are children of light. So hope in the Lord. Do not look at life like it is half empty glass already. Before you start, do not think that you have failed already because we are not in the dark. Final point. I've said that our gospel today is not a literal endorsement to investments and trading. It is a parable. You know what else there is that when buried, it will go away? Love. The word talent in our gospel today is actually translated in the original language of the gospel as talentum, and in Greek it is equivalent to life's savings. It is equivalent to what can we save throughout our lives of working. It is, as it were, that when our gospel today, when Jesus mentions about the talents left to the disciples, to the servants, it is equivalent to Jesus telling, I am leaving everything to you. And come to think of it, in the Gospel of John, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave everything, including his son. And so perhaps our parable today can be translated as the parable of love. So that when we think about love, if it is something that you give away, it will multiply. But when it is buried, it will go away. And perhaps the saying of Jesus in the ending of our gospel today, for to everyone who has more will be given, and he will grow rich. But the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. If we put the word love to the saying at the end of our gospel today, so for example, if we say, for to everyone who has loved more love will be given to the person. And to the person who has not loved, love will never happen in the life of this person.